They banished humanity, so we shut the gates and abandoned the entire galaxy. The chamber smelled like 17 kinds of filtered air, and not one of them was built for human lungs. 11 years. 11 years of breathing that recycled compromise, and I still noticed it every single morning the way you notice a splinter that never healed, present, manageable, and unwilling to let you forget it existed. The chamber was circular, 300 meters across, with tiered seating for 217 species arranged in the kind of perfect democratic geometry that looks excellent in official photographs and feels like a verdict when you are the subject of the deliberation. The Veth ambassador was still talking. 4 hours. 4 hours of translated speeches about human instability, human unpredictability, and the uniquely alarming accelerating trajectory of a species that refused, to plateau. The translation node clipped to my collar converted every syllable into clean, flat English, which somehow made the entire experience worse than it might otherwise have been. There is something specifically unkind about hearing your sentence of exile delivered in your own language. It closes every door of misinterpretation. It ensures you sit with the full, precise weight of exactly what is being said, with no comfortable distance left between you and the meaning. I clicked my pen. Click. 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 The Yessen ambassador, a species that resembled an ancient stone cathedral if the cathedral had been given opinions, a permanent low-level frustration with everything around it, and an extraordinary talent for looking disappointed, rotated one of its upper optical clusters in my direction. The message was unmistakable even across 15 meters of diplomatic space: stop that noise immediately. I clicked the pen one more time. Slowly. Deliberately. I was not nervous. I want to state that clearly, because it matters. Nervous implies uncertainty, and I had no uncertainty left by that point in the proceedings. 4 days of deliberation had moved exactly as I had known they would, from the opening statements through the formal testimony and into the final charge reading, each stage arriving on a schedule that felt less like democracy and more like a sentence being read aloud to someone who had already been informed of the verdict in private. What I was holding in my chest that afternoon was not nerves. It was the specific, settled calm of a man who has already read the last page of a book and is simply turning the remaining pages at an appropriate pace, waiting for the story to arrive where he already knows it ends. The Compact Council held 217 member species. They had been in formal deliberation for 4 full days. The charges against humanity, and they did call them charges, which I found genuinely audacious given that no one had yet clearly identified which specific codified law had been violated, organized themselves into 4 categories. First, accelerated technological development exceeding the agreed compact growth ceilings by a margin the Council had described in the charge documentation as alarming. Humanity had been asked to moderate the pace of our propulsion research. Twice formally, and once more over a diplomatic dinner that satisfied absolutely no one at the table. Each time, we had listened. Each time, we had acknowledged the concern with appropriate diplomatic language. Each time, we had continued working, because we are constitutionally incapable of stopping work that is not yet finished. Second, unauthorized construction in designated fallow space. 12 star systems marked as protected and undeveloped under compact conservation policy. We had built listening posts in 9 of them. Functional, minimal, unannounced, and thoroughly unauthorized. They were there. Third, unilateral military engagement in compact-adjacent conflict zones on 4 separate occasions. Each time, the Council had formally designated those conflicts as under active adjudication. Each time, humanity had weighed the projected timeline of adjudication against the current rate of casualties and found the mathematics unacceptable by any standard we recognized. We had acted. The conflicts had ended. The Council had sent 4 formal letters of protest, each one longer and more elaborately structured than the last, documenting in precise detail exactly how far outside procedural bounds our actions had fallen. We had sent 4 replies. Short ones. 1 word each. The word was the same in all 4 letters, noted. Fourth, and this was the charge that carried the real weight, the one sitting at the center of all 4 days of deliberation like a stone in shallow water. Fourth was this: humanity was developing in ways the Compact's predictive models could not reliably track. Not provably dangerous. Not yet. Not with the kind of hard, demonstrable evidence that would satisfy a formal legal standard. But the trend lines kept climbing. They kept accelerating beyond the existing projections. They kept bending upward at angles that made older, more established civilizations deeply uneasy in the specific way that people become uneasy when someone in the room is growing at a pace they cannot measure and in a direction they cannot fully anticipate. That was the real charge. Not what we had done. What we might eventually do. I understood it. I had not shared this understanding with anyone back home, because it would not have been received well. But sitting in that chamber through 4 days of deliberation, I understood their fear with a clarity I found personally inconvenient. Older civilizations build the way experienced engineers construct bridges, methodical, layer upon tested layer, each component verified before the next one is placed, the whole structure proceeding at the pace of certainty. Humanity builds the way water finds its path through rock, fast, lateral, adaptive, and thoroughly indifferent to whatever design existed before the water arrived. We are not aggressive by intent. We are relentless by nature. We see things that are broken and we fix them before asking permission. We see empty space and we fill it with something useful. We see problems and we solve them, because the alternative is watching solvable problems remain unsolved, and watching a solvable problem remain unsolved is something we are structurally incapable of tolerating. Relentless, it turns out, reads very much like a threat when you are standing still and watching it from across the room. The Veth ambassador concluded its remarks. The chamber shifted into formal vote configuration. The tally was called. I opened my notepad. I drew a small, careful rectangle. Below it I wrote, gate. Below that I wrote, closed. The votes populated the overhead display one by one, species by species, delegation by delegation. The translation node read the count quietly in my ear. I had set the volume low because I did not need the volume. I was watching the tally. 214 in favor. 3 abstentions. 0 opposed. Not one. In a chamber of 217 distinct civilizations with 217 separate histories and 217 different reasons to think carefully about this decision, not one species had voted against it. I let that number sit in my chest for exactly 1 second. The Yessen ambassador rose to its full, considerable height. Its translated voice was formal, measured, and, I will give it this small credit, genuinely sorrowful in the way that ancient, civilized things can be sorrowful about choices they still make anyway. Ambassador Garrett. The compact has deliberated in full good faith with complete procedural compliance. The consensus is unambiguous. Humanity's membership in the Galactic Compact is hereby suspended indefinitely. Complete withdrawal from all shared territories is required to commence immediately, with full completion expected within 30 cycles, I said. A deliberate pause. I was in the process of. I know. I capped the pen. Set it on top of the notepad. We will need 30 of your cycles to collect our things. The chamber was completely still. All of our things, I said. The silence changed. Not in volume. In weight. It settled differently, the way a room changes when someone says something that sounds straightforward but lands with the weight of something that is not. Several of the smaller delegations in the rear sections exchanged looks that the distance between us prevented me from reading clearly. The Yessen ambassador's optical cluster adjusted to face me more directly. That is an acceptable and workable timeline. The compact will naturally expect that essential shared infrastructure and critical relay systems will remain fully operational throughout the transition period. Multiple member systems maintain significant dependencies on. We will provide a complete manifest of every human-built, human-maintained, and human-operated structure currently located within compact territory, I said. Retrieval teams will be organized and assigned by sector. Full advance notice will be delivered to all relevant system administrators before any retrieval operation begins. We will be organized. We will be thorough. We will finish on time. From the back sections, not from the large delegations, not from the Veth or the Yessen or the Korath, but from the smaller, quieter member species that had not spoken a single word during 4 full days of proceedings, a murmur moved through the room. Low, uncertain. The sound of people who had just started doing arithmetic and were not yet ready to discuss where the numbers were going. One of them caught my eye across the chamber floor. The Drev ambassador. Cold World miners, a compact and deliberate species who used words the way careful people use money, only when the expenditure was necessary, never carelessly, never in excess. Their 3 seats had been among the 3 abstentions. Not in favor. Not opposed. Silent. The look between us lasted approximately 3 seconds. I could not fully name what was inside it. I stood. I took my notepad. I walked out of the chamber. The corridor outside was long and white and built for species with a longer stride than mine. My footsteps made the wrong sound on the floor. 11 years of corridors like this one. 11 years of air that was almost right but not quite. 11 years of furniture and rooms and hallways designed by people who had not been thinking of me. 30 cycles. Then that would no longer be something I needed to think about. My comm unit buzzed 4 minutes after the vote. Claire, my aide, who had been watching the feed from our diplomatic suite 4 floors above. Her voice carried the specific quality of someone who has been holding completely still for a very long time and is only now permitting herself to move. Garrett. Yeah. Tell me what we do. Pack, I said. All of it. Every piece we brought. Every piece we built. Every relay, every gate component, every medical post, every navigation array, every atmospheric processor, every wire with a human serial number on it anywhere in compact space. Every last piece. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Slower. The arithmetic had arrived. They have no idea what they are about to lose, do they? Not a question. No, I said. They really don't. I put the comm unit in my pocket and kept walking. The chamber doors were already closed behind me. The verdict was registered. The paperwork was already moving through the compact's administrative system at its appropriate, measured, official speed, being processed by appropriate staff, filed in appropriate databases, copied to appropriate parties. They thought they had solved a problem. They were about to find out what the problem had been quietly holding together. I had a notepad with a small rectangle on it. I had 30 cycles. I had a great deal of work to do. The manifest was 147 pages long. Claire had it printed on actual paper, physical, tangible, impossible to lose in a system crash or a diplomatic incident, and handed it to me on the morning of day 1 with both hands and the expression of someone presenting evidence they have been sitting with for longer than the moment requires. Everything, she said. Every relay, every medical station, every gate component, every navigation array, every atmospheric processor, every cold chain coordination facility with a human serial number anywhere in compact space. This is the complete list. I opened it to a random page in the middle. Beleth Passage Navigation and Safety Patrol. Operated voluntarily by the Human Carrier Group stationed at Hub Station Hale since year 14 of compact membership. Coverage, continuous, 24 cycles per standard rotation. Compact Administrative Awareness of Patrol Existence, partial. Compact Administrative Awareness of Patrol Scope and Operational Coverage Area, no records found. I turned to another page. Yasin 4 Colony Ring, Gravitational Stabilization Units 1 through 6. Installed by human engineering contractors under a formal service agreement with the Yasin Colonial Authority. Original contract, 3 years. At expiration, the Yasin Authority reported budget constraints and could not renew. The human crew completed formal handover documentation, waited 60 days for a replacement maintenance arrangement to be organized, received no update or projected timeline, and continued all maintenance functions without a contract for the following 11 years. Compact Administrative Awareness, no record found. I turned 3 more pages. Similar entries. Turn 3 more. More. Then 5 more without stopping. I closed the manifest. How much of this does the compact actually know about? I asked. Claire had already run the count. She had done it before I asked. About 30%. The formally contracted work, the registered installations, the projects that went through official channels. Everything else, continuation work that outlasted its original agreement, structures we built because the gap existed and we filled it, none of it is in their administrative records. 70% invisible. 70% of 147 pages was work that humanity had been doing quietly, continuously, without announcement and without invoices, because that is what humanity does when it sees something that needs doing and no one is doing it. Not because anyone asked. Not because there was a contract. Because the alternative was watching it not get done, and watching something not get done when you have the means to do it is a form of discomfort that humanity finds genuinely intolerable. We had been extraordinarily uncomfortable, apparently, for a very long time. I put the manifest in my bag and went to meet the retrieval teams. 212 teams, deployed across compact territory from the core systems to the outer transit corridors. Engineers, medical coordinators, supply specialists, atmospheric technicians, navigation programmers, structural analysts, cold chain logistics experts. Each team had a sector assignment. Each sector had a precise retrieval schedule. The schedules had been built with the kind of meticulous, contingency-aware precision that people apply to operations they intend to complete without error and without extension. Sergeant Nina was running the largest team, operating out of the Mareth sector. She met me at the transport bay on the morning of day 1 with a coffee in one hand and her sector breakdown on a tablet in the other. She was the kind of person that long careers in difficult postings produce, someone who could run a complex logistical operation with her left hand and a difficult interpersonal situation with her right without ever confusing which problem required which approach. She reviewed her sector's manifest pages, reviewed the schedule, and said, 30 cycles is tight. Not comfortable. But it holds. It needs to hold. It will. She finished the coffee. The Mareth relay stations are the primary scheduling challenge. 6 stations, minimum 8 days each for safe disassembly without damaging the surrounding grid infrastructure. 3 of them are currently load-bearing for navigation in sectors 12 through 15. Sectors 12 through 15 will need to construct an alternative framework. Nina did not change her expression. There is no existing alternative. Building one from nothing, on their side, with their resources, would take years. Not cycles. They have 30 cycles to begin the process. She nodded in the way that disciplined people nod when they have received a clear instruction and are not going to spend time arguing about it. It was not agreement. It was acknowledgement. We moved on. Day 3 brought the first formal objection. It arrived through official channels from the Compact Logistics Secretariat, addressed to me with full diplomatic formality, and it was very long. The essential content was this: the Mareth relay station served navigation across 14 inhabited systems in 3 species primary transit corridors, and the Compact was formally requesting their exclusion from the retrieval schedule on the grounds of critical infrastructure status requiring multilateral authorization for removal. I read it completely, twice. I replied in one paragraph. The Mareth relay stations had been constructed with human materials, assembled by human engineers, and maintained continuously by human personnel at no charge to the Compact for 19 years. They were human property under any coherent interpretation of the concept. They were on the schedule. The schedule was not changing. The Secretariat sent a second message. Considerably longer than the first. I sent a shorter reply. Day 5. The Council convened an emergency subsession to address the withdrawal operations. I sent Claire as our representative because Claire had substantially more patience than I did for official chamber proceedings and a particular talent for sitting in formal rooms and appearing attentive while listening to arguments she had anticipated and prepared for days in advance. The session ran 6 hours. It produced a formal written request asking humanity to place a pause on all infrastructure retrieval and enter a negotiated transition assistance arrangement with the Compact. Our response, delivered through official channels by Claire: we were pleased to provide complete technical documentation and fully detailed operational manuals for every piece of equipment being retrieved. All documentation would be made available to relevant system administrators before retrieval operations began in their sector. We wished all concerned parties every success with the familiarization and adoption process. Day 7. A message arrived on a personal channel, not the diplomatic address, not any official Compact correspondence system, but the personal comm address of Owen, a supply coordinator who had spent the previous 6 years managing voluntary food distribution logistics for a compact developmental world called Beleth Secondary. The message came from a colony administrator named Petra, who had found Owen's contact information through a community directory that predated the current situation. The message said, "Owen, we have only just learned what is happening. Our cold storage routing runs completely through your coordination system. We have 400,000 people on this world who receive food reliably because of what you built here. Please. We need more time than 30 cycles to solve this." Owen forwarded the message to me with no text attached. I read it twice. I extended Owen's sector schedule by 12 cycles. His team would complete their sector last, well after all other teams had finished. I entered the extension into the field operations log. I did not include it in any formal communication with the Compact Council or the Logistics Secretariat. Owen sent one message back: "Thank you. I replied, "You have 12 extra cycles. Use every one of them to teach someone local how the routing system works. Leave them with something that runs without you." 3 days later he confirmed the training sessions had started. Day 9. An informal diplomatic message arrived at the station from the Yessen ambassador, routed through a back channel that both parties understood would not appear in any official correspondence record. The message was carefully phrased. It said that the compact had not fully appreciated the operational scope of humanity's presence within their collective systems prior to the vote. Significant concern was developing among multiple member species regarding the practical consequences of a complete and simultaneous withdrawal executed at this speed. The ambassador asked whether any dimension of the current situation might be open to reconsideration. I read it 3 times. I thought about 4 days of formal deliberation. 4 specific charges. 214 votes. I composed a reply. The vote was conducted clearly and through the compact's own established procedures. We are honoring it completely and precisely. We will have completed our full withdrawal within the agreed 30 cycles. I sat with the unsent message on my screen for a long time. Then I sent it. Day 12. Nina's team arrived at Gate Station Mareth 7 on schedule to begin disassembly of the 3rd relay station and found a Korath security contingent blocking the primary access corridor. 30 Korath security personnel in full field equipment, positioned across the corridor with the practiced stillness of beings who had decided they were not moving and were entirely comfortable waiting for the rest of the situation to accept that decision. The Korath were large, heavily armored, institutionally resistant to instructions from anything smaller than themselves, which in practice covered the overwhelming majority of species in the galaxy. Nina's 12-person team stood in front of them with retrieval equipment, technical gear, and a schedule. Nina checked her tablet. We are 4 hours and 20 minutes behind schedule. The contingent commander stated through its translation unit that the station was a shared resource under compact jurisdictional authority and could not be removed without a multilateral authorization agreement signed by all affected system administrators in sectors 12 through 15. Nina said, the station was built by humans, owned by humans, and maintained by humans at no charge for 19 years. It is human property. The schedule says today. She looked at the tablet again. We are now 4 hours and 23 minutes behind schedule. The commander sent an urgent priority communication to the Compact Security Council. The Security Council deliberated for exactly 4 hours. Nina's team waited exactly 4 hours. When the 4 hours elapsed, Nina's team walked forward at a steady, unhurried pace. The Korath contingent held their position. Nina's team stopped at a distance that made the situation unmistakably clear to every person in the corridor, and they stood there, 12 humans in work gear and 30 armored Korath security personnel, completely still, in silence, for 38 minutes. The Korath contingent stepped aside. Nina's field report reached me 20 minutes later, Mareth 7 retrieval complete. Returning to schedule. I logged it and moved on. Day 15. Every sector was generating requests simultaneously. Navigation disruption warnings from 5 major ship lanes. A pharmaceutical distribution network in the outer territories reporting supply chain fractures because the central warehouse coordination software was human-built and scheduled for decommission that week. A water reclamation facility on a mid-range colony world notifying us that its maintenance certification applied only to human-trained technicians and that no other qualified personnel existed on-world or in the surrounding system. A stellar mapping relay in the southern transit corridor going dark 2 days ahead of its projected date because its power supply was integrated into a gate component that had already been retrieved in the previous sector sweep. Every message said some version of the same thing: we did not know you were doing this. They were not lying. They genuinely had not known. Not because the work had been concealed, every team was registered somewhere in the administrative system, every serial number was logged in some database, every maintenance record existed in some filing structure. They had not known because when something functions reliably and costs you nothing, you remove it from the list of things that require your attention. You plan around its continued presence without examining what that presence consists of. You let it run. You assume it will keep running indefinitely, because it always has. We had been running quietly for a very long time. On day 15 I read through every request in the queue until the list was empty. Then I set the tablet down. I picked up the pen. Held it in both hands for a moment. Outside the window, in the direction of the nearest human gate, the stars were the same stars they had always been. They did not rearrange themselves based on council votes. They did not dim because of what had been decided in a circular chamber 4 floors below where I had been sitting for 4 days. They burned with the same perfect, enormous indifference they had maintained for longer than any species in that chamber could honestly claim to have existed. 15 days. I put the pen in my pocket and went back to work. Day 30 arrived the way all conclusions arrive when you have been working toward them with precision, not as a surprise, not as a relief, but as a fixed point you reach because the work was done and the schedule was met and there was nothing left between you and it. The last human structures in compact space came down on schedule. Every sector had reported completion by hour 22. Claire compiled the final confirmation documents, printed them on paper, and slid the stack across the desk to me without a word. I signed on the last line. "That is everything," she said. "That is everything," I confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. The compact transmitted 7 separate requests in the last 48 hours asking us to delay the final gate closure. I know. The tone of the last 3 was significantly different from the first 4. I know. She looked at me carefully. The last one came from the Yesin ambassador directly. Official record. Not a back channel. I had read it. The message had stated that the Compact Council had not possessed full operational information at the time of the original vote and formally requested a delay of the final gate closure to permit emergency review under the existing reconsideration clause. At the bottom, below the official signature block, in a character size noticeably smaller than the body of the message, 8 words had been added: "We made a mistake. Please." I had read those 8 words 4 times. "What did you reply?" Claire asked. I said the closure would proceed on schedule. She nodded. Was that right? Not challenging. Genuinely asking. I picked up the pen and looked at it. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me in a year." The final gate was in the outer shear. Not historically significant. Not the largest or the most strategically critical of the human gates that had operated in compact space. I had chosen it for exactly that reason. The last gate humanity closed in this part of the universe was going to be a working gate. A useful, ordinary, functional gate that had been running because running was what it did. Not a monument. Not a symbol. A gate. I went there personally. No protocol required it. No one had asked me to. I went because I needed to be the hand that did it. The gate was the approximate size of a medium city and it hummed with the low, continuous frequency of something that has been operating for long enough that it has stopped registering itself as running. The operations crew had stepped back. The shutdown sequence was loaded. I walked to the console. I keyed the sequence. 11 seconds. The gate closed. The hum stopped. The silence that replaced it was a different kind of silence from the one in the council chamber. That silence had been heavy with anticipation, loaded with what was approaching. This silence was simply what remained when something very large and very constant stopped being either of those things. I stood at the console for a moment. Then I walked back to the transport, and we left. The first transmissions reached the long-range monitoring array 6 days after closure. Not all at once. That is how these things always begin, not in a single catastrophic moment, but in isolated signals that look manageable when examined individually and only reveal their connection when you step back far enough to see the pattern. A shipping lane in Sector 12 reporting navigation inconsistency across 3 standard routes. A pharmaceutical relay station in the outer territories flagging an unexpected cold chain interruption. The Beleth Passage recording a sharp increase in unauthorized vessel activity beginning 5 days after the anti-piracy carrier group had completed its retrieval and departed. Claire monitored the array. I read the daily reports every morning at the same time, with coffee, at a desk that was not a diplomatic desk and did not face any direction that mattered politically. Week 2. A colony world in Sector 14 declared a navigation emergency. 3 scheduled supply vessels had failed to arrive. Investigation determined that the ship captains had been operating with positioning data provided by a relay network that no longer existed. Week 3. The pharmaceutical cold chain serving 7 worlds in the outer territories reported its first significant supply interruption. Medical supply levels on 3 of those worlds had dropped below the recommended reserve threshold. The Compact's administrative emergency response system was generating contingency coordination frameworks. The frameworks required infrastructure to execute. The infrastructure had not been built yet. Week 4. The Yasin 4 colony ring sent a distress signal. Not the Yasen Colonial Authority. The ring itself. The automated monitoring system that the 3 human maintenance engineers had installed and calibrated 11 years ago, still running the alert protocols they had configured, broadcasting on the standard maintenance frequency the way it had always been configured to broadcast when a maintenance cycle was overdue by more than 30 days. Gravitational Stabilization Units 3 and 4, the alert read. Maintenance cycle overdue by 31 days. Manual override required within 14 days to prevent progressive performance degradation. Warning, unit output currently measuring at 91% of nominal baseline. Recommend immediate inspection by certified maintenance personnel. No certified maintenance personnel were coming. I read that alert 3 times. I filed it in the daily log. Week 6. The compact's first official recontact transmission reached the monitoring array. Formally structured, signed by the Secretary of the Full Council, sent through every available long-range frequency simultaneously. It stated that an emergency session of the Full Council had convened and voted, by a margin of 179 to 22, to formally invite humanity to enter reaccession negotiations. The compact acknowledged that the original expulsion had proceeded without full information regarding the operational integration of human infrastructure within shared systems. Humanity was requested to respond at its earliest convenience. I read it twice. I thought about week 2 and week 3 and week 4. I thought about the gravitational stabilization warning in the pharmaceutical supply gaps and the navigation emergencies building in the southern corridors. Then I thought about a different question. Not whether the compact had made a miscalculation, that was obvious and they clearly knew it. But whether the miscalculation had changed anything. Whether 214 species had looked at what humanity was and genuinely revised their understanding of it. Or whether they had simply discovered that what humanity was included a set of functions they required. Those were not the same thing. A doctor who realizes the patient was not a problem but a resource is not the same as a doctor who realizes the patient was a person. I drafted a reply. It took 3 days. The reply said, the compact voted clearly, through its own established procedures, with full deliberation. We honored that vote precisely and completely. We have established ourselves in a new location and are engaged in active development there. We wish the compact well in its ongoing work. I sat with the draft for an entire evening. Then I sent it and went back to work. On a new galaxy. I want to explain what I mean by that. When the 30 cycles began, humanity had not been sitting still. While 212 retrieval teams were systematically recovering everything we had built in compact space, a separate operation, larger, quieter, running on a timeline that had been in active development for 3 years before the vote, because some of us had been reading the trend lines and understanding where they were pointing, had been building something entirely different. The Sculptor Dwarf Galaxy. A satellite galaxy. Small by galactic measures, unclaimed by any compact member species, positioned at a distance that made it operationally and politically independent of everything in the volume of space we were in the process of leaving behind. The first human gate had been placed in the Sculptor Dwarf in the final year of our compact membership. The second and third followed in the weeks after the vote. By the time the last compact gate closed in the outer shear, 11 human gates were operational in the Sculptor Dwarf, 47 survey teams were running active mapping operations, and a construction program had been running around the clock for months. We were not leaving to nothing. We were leaving to a beginning. My quarters on the new primary station had a large window. The window faced toward the old galaxy, which was visible from this distance as a soft, diffuse brightness spread across a wide arc of sky, the accumulated light of billions of stars and hundreds of civilizations conducting the ordinary business of continuing to exist. From this distance, looking at it was like looking at something that had already become history even while it was still happening. I put a hand-drawn star map on the wall. I could not fully explain why I drew it by hand except that I had needed to make it myself, needed the process of putting each system on the page with my own hand to make the distance between here and there feel real. The old galaxy. Every major system I had spent 11 years navigating as a diplomat and 2 years before that learning as a student and 4 years before that hearing about from a grandfather who had served on the first compact diplomatic mission and who had believed, with a completeness I had inherited and then spent 11 years slowly losing, that the compact was the right direction for humanity. Every time the monitoring array logged a system going dark, not physically, not the star, but the organized, communicating, functioning presence of a civilization in crisis, I put a small mark on the map. By the end of month 8 I had run out of space for marks. I did not draw a new map. I took the old one off the wall, folded it, put it in the bottom drawer of the desk. The wall was better empty. The sculptor dwarf was moving at a pace that, if I am honest, was the first thing since the vote that made me feel something other than the specific tired clarity of a person who has completed a very large and very necessary task. New stellar cartography produced at a rate that the compact survey teams would have found genuinely alarming. New gate networks extending across systems that had not had names 6 months ago. New colony frameworks built from the first foundation stone on human principles and human timelines, with no growth ceiling above them and no formal advisory letter waiting in the diplomatic queue. The word new kept arriving in my days like a frequency that had been present but blocked before. New problems that were interesting rather than procedural. New solutions that did not require 3 rounds of multilateral consultation before implementation. New names for new places, assigned by the people who had found them, carrying the particular flavor of names given by people who were genuinely pleased to be where they were. Dana was on the stellar cartography team. She had mapped 3 new candidate systems in 6 weeks and named them after her 2 children and her dog, with a complete and total absence of self-consciousness about this that I found genuinely delightful. She was working on a 4th system when I stopped by the cartography bay one afternoon, and she held up the preliminary scan with the energy of someone who has found something she had been looking for without knowing it. "Look at this orbit," she said. "Look at this. This system has 4 habitable range bodies. 4. I have never seen 4. There was an engineer named Felix who was redesigning the gate architecture framework from foundational principles, using what he described as the cleanest design space I have ever worked in, because there is no one here to file an objection before I have finished the first draft. He was building something that the compact's engineering standards would not have permitted in 3 separate places, and the early projections suggested it would be 40% more efficient than anything currently operating in the old galaxy. There was a pilot named Colette who had been flying survey runs 12 hours a day for 4 months without reducing her pace. When I found her in the flight bay after her 3rd consecutive extended shift and asked why she was maintaining that schedule, she looked at me with the calm patience of someone who considers the question faintly absurd. "Because there are more systems than I have seen yet," she said. "And I intend to see them." These were the people who built things, I thought. Not the ones who vote on what should not be allowed to exist. Month 11. The monitoring array registered a new signal. Not a distress broadcast. Not a formal compact transmission. Something different, a personal message, routed through 3 separate improvised relay connections that had no business being strung together in the configuration they had been assembled in, clearly constructed by someone working with severely limited resources and a very strong motivation to make contact across an extraordinary distance. The signal was weak. The estimated transit time was 42 days. The message was from the Drev. I read it standing at the array station, alone, at a late hour when the station was quiet and the stars visible through the observation panels were the new stars, the nearby ones, the ones that had been given names by people who were glad to be here. The message said, "We are the Drev of the cold systems. We spoke no words against you during the deliberation. We cast no vote against you. We have not and will not speak against you. We are now approximately 2 growing seasons from a complete food system failure. Our cold chain infrastructure is no longer functional, and we do not have the technical knowledge or the equipment to restore it. We understand we have no standing to make a request. We are making one anyway. If there is anyone who is still listening on this frequency, please respond." I read it 3 times. I sat down at the array station chair, which was not designed for sitting in contemplation but served adequately. I thought about the look across the council chamber floor on the day of the vote. The Drev ambassador. 3 seconds of held eye contact. I had not been able to name what was inside the look at the time. I could name it now. It was the look of a species that understood exactly what was coming, had no power to stop it, and was watching it arrive anyway with the specific dignity of people who do not look away from things even when looking away would be easier. I held the message on the screen for a long time. Then I got up, walked down 2 corridors, and knocked on Claire's office door. She was awake. She was always awake at hours that suggested she did not require sleep in the standard quantities. I put the message on her screen and stood back. She read it once. She looked at me. "The Drev were the abstentions," she said. "Yes. All 3 of their seats. Not 1 vote against us. No. And they have a food system failure coming. 2 seasons. Maybe less, depending on growing conditions." She looked at the message again for a moment. When she spoke, Her voice was the voice she used when she had already decided what she thought and was giving me the space to reach the same conclusion. "What do you want to do?" I had been thinking about what I said to her on day 1 of the withdrawal. "Pack. All of it. Every last piece." The clean rectangle on my notepad. The word closed. The final gate in the outer shear and the 11 seconds of shutdown sequence and the silence that came after it. I had been thinking about Colette in the flight bay saying there are more systems than I have seen yet. I had been thinking about what we were now, in this new space, under this new sky, building something that did not require anyone's permission. "We go and get them," I said. Claire waited. "Not the compact," I said. "Not a negotiation. Not a re-accession discussion. Not a framework or a process or a subcommittee. We open one gate, we go to the Drev home system, we bring through everyone who wants to come, and we close the gate behind the last one. Just the Drev. Just the Drev." She held the message on her screen for another few seconds. "Okay," she said. She pulled up the navigation system. "I will start the route calculation." The operation took 7 days to plan fully and 3 days to execute. The route required threading a single temporary gate through the dead zone between the compact's core systems and the Drev home system, a narrow, technically demanding passage that occupied Lara and Calvin, the 2 gate engineers assigned to hold the aperture, for the better part of 36 hours without significant rest. They had been briefed on the timeline before accepting the assignment. Neither had raised an objection. Lara had said she had done longer, which I did not entirely believe but appreciated. The gate opened at 0600 on a Tuesday by local Drev calendar. The first ship through was the advance team, Lara and Calvin's technical crew, a cold storage infrastructure specialist named Grant who had been leading a supply chain rebuild project in the new systems and had volunteered for this operation the moment he heard about it, 6 supply coordinators, and Owen. Owen had arrived at the briefing room the previous morning with his field bag already packed and a look on his face that preempted any discussion about whether his presence was necessary. He was the best cold chain logistics specialist on the station. He knew the Drev infrastructure from a distance and was prepared to learn it in person. I had not argued. The advance team had 11 hours on the Drev side before the first families began arriving at the gate. Grant spent those 11 hours conducting a rapid survey of the cold storage facilities closest to the gate entry point and identifying which components could be salvaged before retrieval and which needed to be abandoned entirely. Owen began his own assessment of the food distribution routing, working alongside 2 Drev agricultural coordinators who had apparently been expecting a human supply specialist in the specific way that people expect things they have been hoping for long enough that hope and expectation have become the same thing. The Drev came through in a continuous, steady flow for 22 hours. Families. Extended households. Elderly individuals who moved at a careful pace and looked at the gate with expressions that were not quite fear and not quite wonder but something that lived precisely between the two. Young Drev who moved with the energy of people who had made a large decision and were done reconsidering it. A group of cold systems miners who came through in their work gear, tools still attached, with the bearing of people who intended to be useful immediately upon arrival and had planned accordingly. About a third of the Drev population crossed through. The ones who could make the journey. The ones who had looked at 2 seasons to failure and a galaxy that was progressively losing its functional infrastructure and decided that somewhere new and uncertain was preferable to somewhere familiar and declining. I did not record their number precisely until afterward. During the operation I was not counting. I was watching the line and making sure it kept moving. Grant supervised the cold chain equipment transfer for the final 8 hours, salvaged components, calibrated systems, portable units that the Drev technical staff had identified as the highest priority to bring through. He worked without stopping. Owen walked alongside the final group himself. He had been on the Drev side for more than 20 hours at that point and he walked with the specific gait of someone who is running on the kind of determination that does not register physical tiredness until afterward. The last Drev came through the gate with 6 hours to spare before the scheduled closure. Owen came through last. He walked through the gate and turned around and looked back at the aperture for a moment, at the sky on the other side that was not the sky, at the Drev systems that remained on the other side, at the distance between here and the world those families had just left and would not return to. Then he turned back and kept walking. Lara and Calvin initiated the closure sequence. The gate closed. The silence was the same silence it had always been when a gate closed, the absence of the hum, the specific quiet of something large and functional going still. I was standing at the primary operations console when the closure confirmation registered on the board. A small green indicator light shifted to white. Lara marked the operation complete in the field log. Calvin was already asleep in a chair against the far wall, his field jacket folded under his head, in the manner of someone who had decided that the particular location of the sleeping surface was irrelevant information. I noted the completion time. I walked from the operation center to the observation corridor that ran along the outer hull of the primary station, where the large panels gave a clear view of the new sky. The stars visible from here were the new stars, the nearby ones, the ones that were in the process of being mapped and named and surveyed by people who were glad to be doing it. A Drev child was standing at the observation panel closest to the far end of the corridor. She had arrived with her family approximately 3 hours earlier and had apparently identified this window as the most interesting location on the station and had no intention of moving until she had finished examining everything it had to offer. She was small. The panel was large. She stood with her hands pressed flat against the base of the transparent barrier, looking out at the stars with the complete, focused attention of a child who has decided this particular thing is worth her full consideration and is giving it exactly that. She said something in Drev. The small portable translation unit I was carrying rendered it as approximately, "Is that where we came from?" I looked at the direction she was facing first. She was not looking toward the distant glow of the old galaxy. She was looking at the new stars, the close ones, the unnamed ones, the ones that Dana was working through one by one with her scanner and her completely unself-conscious naming process. I looked back toward where the old galaxy sat in the far sky, faint and spread and still present whether I looked at it or not. "Yes," I said. "A long way from here." She considered this. She looked at the old light for a moment, then back at the new stars. She pressed her palm more firmly against the glass, as though she was touching the new stars directly, feeling the distance between herself and them as something that could be closed. She chose the new ones. Completely. Without hesitation. Smart kid. I reached into my pocket. The pen was there, where it had been since the day of the vote, since the chamber and the corridor and the 11 years of almost right air. I took it out. I held it for a moment. I did not click it. Somewhere back there, in that soft distant brightness that had been home and was now simply a direction, 214 species were doing the arithmetic they should have done before they voted. They were working through the numbers in real time, living inside the results of a calculation they had not completed before making the decision, and the numbers were not going to resolve in their favor. That was not my problem anymore. I put the pen back in my pocket. The Drev child was still at the window, still looking at the unnamed stars, still pressing her small hand flat against the glass as if proximity to the barrier was proximity to the stars themselves. We had a galaxy to build. We had already started.